Edinburgh Castle stands at the head of the Royal Mile, the scene of many historical episodes. The steep valleys on either side of the spine on which Edinburgh stands were carved out in the Ice Age. This is the southern valley called the Grassmark. The Half Moon Battery was built by Regent Morton after the castle had been captured from Kirkcaldy of Grange, who held it from 1570 to 1573 in the name of Mary Queen of Scots. The drawbridge spans a dry moat. It is comparatively modern and is the present entrance. Over the gateway are the arms of Scotland, and on either side the figures of Wallace and Bruce, the two great heroes of Scotland's struggle for independence in the 13th and 14th centuries. Behind these windows are the former royal apartments known as the Old Palace, today a museum. Here is the fireplace of the royal kitchen. Not all the rooms are as spacious as Queen Mary's room, which has a fine portrait of Charles II. Opening from this large apartment is a tiny room in which Mary, Queen of Scots, in June 1566, gave birth to a son who was to become James VI of Scotland and first of England. Part of the old palace is used to house the regalia, which lay forgotten in a chest from the Treaty of Union in 1707 until the year 1818, when Sir Walter Scott rediscovered them. The Sword of State was presented to James IV by Pope Julius II. Cardinal York, brother of Prince Charles Edward, bequeathed 4 jewels which form part of the regalia. Some say that the crown contains the circlet worn by Robert the Bruce. The whole crown may have been renewed by James V in 1542 when it was arched over. It was used at the coronation of Charles II in 1651 at school. Parliament Hall has been the scene of many banquets, the most infamous being that in 1440, when the Douglas brothers were murdered. On the opposite side of Crown Square is the impressive Scottish National War Memorial. In its long history, the defences of the castle were never overcome. The most famous gun in the castle is Mons Meg, forged in the 15th century. When fired in honour of the visit of James, Duke of York, in 1680, the gun unexpectedly exploded. Mons Meg stands in front of St. Margaret's Chapel, which was built by Margaret, Queen of Malcolm Canmore. This is the oldest building on the castle rock, but the walls have been reconstructed at various times. The Norman chancel arch was completed by her son, David I. At the foot of the esplanade is this 17th century building, Cannonball House. It is said that the cannonball embedded in its wall was fired from the castle during one of the sieges. The tall buildings of Victoria Street mark the line of the west bow, the gate by which the sovereign generally entered Edinburgh. Look at the great height of the buildings, so typical of the Royal Mile. From the Castle Hill, the Royal Mile stretches down and down to Holyroodhouse. Over the centuries, this street saw Scotland's history evolve. Against this backcloth there moved kings and cutthroats, lawyers and ladies, soldiers and citizens. Milnes Court was built by Charles II's master mason. This great tenement, the first to be built round a central court, has been reconstructed as a residence for students. An old balcony in Riddle's Court, where James VI was entertained by the town council. Gladstone's Land. The arches are all that remain of the arcading which once stretched down the High Street. Robert Burns had lodgings nearby. The high kirk of St. Giles stands on a site occupied by a church since 854. While it is a parish church, it is also of national importance, the scene of great occasion. The Royal Archers, the Queen's bodyguard for Scotland, march into position as guard of honour. A royal visit is a special occasion for Scotland. At the service, the Queen is to decorate her royal visitor with the Order of the Thistle, Scotland's Order of Chivalry. The heart of Midlothian marks the doorway of the toll booth, which served first as Parliament Hall, then Town Hall, Privy Council Chambers, College of Justice, and finally a jail. Near St. Giles, in County Square, is the Advocates' Library, from which grew the National Library of Scotland. Through the opening is Parliament House, where the Scottish Parliament met from 1640 to 1707. It now contains the courts of law. The great Parliament Hall is famous for its marvellous roof and huge stained glass windows. The classical frontage is also of great beauty. The crown steeple of St. Giles looks down on a statue of Charles II, erected while he was still alive. Behind the statue is the grave of John Knox. The city chambers were built as the Royal Exchange in 1753 and were once the tallest buildings in Europe, with 14 stories. Many of the older Edinburgh tenements had as many as 20 stories. This wing contains the council chamber. The stalk of the Market Cross, 12th century. Royal proclamations are made from the balcony with great pomp by the Scottish heralds. Between the city chambers and the North Bridge are old tenements, now nearly all commercial premises. Beyond is the Tron Kirk, which takes its name from the tron, or balance, on which salt was weighed for tax purposes. Behind that frontage is a fascinating glimpse of the way in which tenements were built from the High Street down to the Cowgate. They were crowded together to make the greatest possible use of the land. In them, the nobility lived on the lower floors with working people above them. Recently, by demolition, this is now one of the few playgrounds in the Royal Mile. East of the North Bridge, the famous literary figure Allan Ramsay had his shop in Carrubbas Close. Where the street narrows is a 16th century house in which tradition says John Knox lived. Next to it stands Mowbray House, another 16th century building. Just east of John Knox's house was the Netherbow Port, a twin-turreted gate leading to the Canongate, a borough quite separate from Edinburgh. On the lower slopes of the Colton Hills stood the jail, built to replace the toll booth. The boys are standing on the site of the Flodden Wall, built by the citizens of Edinburgh to keep out the expected English invaders after that disastrous battle in which the pride of the nobility of Scotland perished. St. Mary Street follows the line of the wall. It was 50 feet high and 5 feet thick, with battlements and loopholes. From here stretched the borough of the Canongate, that is the gate or walk of the canons, the monks of Holyrood Abbey. The Canongate was ruled by the Abbot of Holyrood until the Reformation. Chesil's Court stands on the site of the Hostel of St. John. This building has recently been extensively reconstructed. It is easy to rebuild in brick, but where repair work is necessary or alterations have to be made, masons can still be found to redress stone. Much of Edinburgh stone came from nearby quarries such as Leith and Craigleith. The tool being used to clear up the windowsill is called a comb. On the north side, a tenement has been rebuilt over a shopping arcade similar to the one under Gladstone's land. The new front frontage of Chesil's Court in the Canongate has a pend leading to the courtyard, which is a pleasing appearance. Stones from old buildings were carefully preserved and kept to be used again. There are few trees in the Canongate, and building operations went on round this one. Many houses had deteriorated so badly that they could not be modernized and had to be demolished. The Chesil's Court buildings facing the street have been rebuilt in the same style as the tenements they replace. Another wing has been given a modern treatment. Murray House, now a college of education, was Cromwell's headquarters while in Edinburgh. It was also the house to which the Scottish commissioners attempting to sign the Treaty of Union in 1707 were finally driven by the mob. The Canongate toll booth, now a museum, was formerly used for collecting taxes, then became a jail where Jacobites and Covenanters were imprisoned. Huntly House, a 16th century mansion, is another museum containing items of great local interest. Bake House Close lies behind Huntly House, and in the time-worn stonework we can see signs of its long history. 150 years after James VI moved his court to London, the Canongate still numbered among its residents 2 dukes, 16 earls, 7 barons, 7 judges, and 13 baronets. The Canongate church was built after James VII and II took back Holyrood Abbey for use as a royal chapel for the Knights of the Thistle. This stone was erected by Robert Burns to the memory of Robert Ferguson, whose poetry had been such an inspiration to him. Pageantry still comes to the Canongate as a royal escort precedes the bearer of the Standard of Scotland. After driving through Edinburgh on a state occasion, the Queen is returning to the palace of Holyroodhouse. One of the features of the Royal Mile is its closes, pens and wines, and here is a typical example. Queensberry Lodge, another of the town houses of the nobility. Officers of Cope's army were imprisoned here after the Battle of Preston Pans. As a contrast to the old building, newly built flats on the next site provide a modern note. The Canongate is a place where people live and work. It's not merely a collection of old houses, it is a community. Whiteford House is a residence for ex-service veterans. Nearby, children have to find their own place of amusement, often on a doorstep. The last remaining house in Reed's Court has been turned into the Canongate Manse. Whitehorse Close is an ancient courtyard block, recently renovated. It dates from the middle of the 17th century. From this inn, the mail coach left for London once a week. Now we see the foot of the Canongate and the Abbey Strand, part of the enclosure of the Abbey. The house on the left is a former lodging house for debtors, who could take advantage of the right of sanctuary. Once across the boundary line marked by the brass S's, they were safe from the people whom they owed money. Only on Sundays could debtors go outside the sanctuary without being arrested. The sanctuary took in nearly the same area as the present King's Park. Formerly, arches spanned the street above the coat of arms to form a porch, the main entrance to the palace forecourt. The original Abbey of Holyrood was founded in 1128 by King David I as a thank offering for from an enraged white stag. Several Scottish kings are buried in the ruined Abbey nave. The oldest part of the palace, begun in 1501, contains the apartments associated with Mary, Queen of Scots. The rest of the palace was built on instructions from Charles II, the foundation stone being laid in 1671. The great arms above the entrance are those of the kings of Scotland. The southern gates open onto the park and are a fine example of Scottish craftsmanship. The pillars are embellished with heraldic emblems, and coats of arms are found inside the palace. According to legend, the plaque on the floor shows where David Rizzio, the Queen's secretary, died after being stabbed in the presence of Mary, Queen of Scots. Her husband, Darnley, has been blamed for causing Rizzio's murder. The inner room was Lord Darnley's bedroom. It was not easy for the royal family to have privacy, and private stairs were quite usual in the castles and palaces of old. These stairs are usually of turnpike construction, built in a round tower. But this stair is in the thickness of the wall. As such stairs were usually built without a handrail, a rope was slung from top to bottom round the centre turn of the stair. Tapestry and other needlework was a favourite occupation of royal ladies. Two of the pieces in this case were sewn by Mary, Queen of Scots during her imprisonment in England. The inside faces of the great thick walls of medieval buildings were often brightened by woven tapestries, which were sometimes draped like curtains and sometimes fitted closely to the walls. All sorts of details were worked into the design, and many are amusing as well as interesting. Behind the palace is the greenery of the royal park, and the simple yet dignified building reflects the early sun. From the palace forecourt, we look back, up the Royal Mile, past the houses of the great and the tenements of the poor, past the shops and the churches, the workshops and the libraries, to the great castle, keeping watch on the rock.